Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming at you live again for yet again another, or I should say, not to be redundant, but a new video here at the Film Fanatic headquarters. It's been cool lately. I've been checking out a lot of new movies, and some of the more recent videos have been focused on brand new movies that I've seen. Well, actually, not totally brand new, because there's a lot of these films are a lot of the newer films. That's always a little bit of a problem for me. A lot of these films, well, in general now, movies that come out, it seems like they have limited releases, especially if they're not like mega blockbusters. Like if they're Marvel movies, it's pretty easy to see them in the theater because of the scope of them. But I'm kind of burnt out on Marvel movies and superhero movies all alike. I've talked about that before. So I'm a huge comic book fan, and when it comes to that whole kind of universe, I'm a super nerd in regards to all of that stuff, and I love that stuff to death. But at the same time, I've reached a point of where I'm not really excited about a lot of those movies anymore. I've I've been pretty disappointed by some of the newer releases around all things Marvel and comic book movies in general. And there's definitely been a fatigue that's set in where I'm just kind of tired of it all, and I'm wanting something new and fresh. And you know, so I'm taking a back seat. But a lot of these kind of taking a back seat to my my usual enthusiasm about seeing Marvel movies. But a lot the of the videos I've been doing lately, I've been doing, some newer movies, and today's show, and then a couple other shows coming up. I I try to stay pretty current and check out lots of new things. So, but because a lot of those films I find are, they either don't get any kind of theatrical release, or they're only available in on streaming platforms, and I don't really stream anything. And then the thing that I notice what seems to happen is that there's a lag, a real time lag, as to when films get released on DVD or for rental purposes, like physical copies, which is what I do. I don't stream anything, so I've done some reviews on some newer films. Pretty recently, I did a review on the film Tar, which is a really great film. But that was, again, an example of there was, a long lag as to when I could see that movie. That movie was in the theaters, but for a brief time, and then it was streaming, I believe, for a while. It still is available streaming, but by the time it got to DVD, the rental phase where you could actually rent it, or Blu-ray, it was months. So that's one thing that's a little bit of a pain in the butt on my end. I can't really. It takes a while for me to see newer films, because I love to, always. I'm always brainstorming with this channel as far as trying to do new things, and I typically cover a lot of older films, but there's a lot of great films that have been coming out. So this film is a movie, well, a perfect example of a pretty big lag as to when I I just watched it last night for the first time, and there was a pretty big lag as to when this film came out. This came out last year already. It's hard to believe, and here we are in April, 2023. So months. So that's a thing. In the years past, before, well, the pandemic and before the whole streaming kind of phenomenon, it was pretty easy to see new movies. They were after, it seemed like the time period for, like, say, when a movie would come out, it would it would go get its run, and get its theatrical run. It'd be in the theaters, and then there might be, maybe a month or two before it would come out on DVD or Blu-ray, like where there would be a physical copy of the film, and then you could just rent it or see it. And I think with complexity of the streaming thing, a lot of films now are released in the theater, but also they're also at the same time they're available on these various streaming platforms. So they tend to have a longer life, where or basically you can see them anytime online. But the transition from them becoming going into a physical format to where they're released because of the streaming situation, there is a longer much what I've seen, what used to be maybe a month or two, when they would come out of the theater. Now it's like 6 months, sometimes longer, before they come out. It's really weird. And the other thing that's a big factor is there's a lot of films now that don't even get to the theaters, and they're exclusively on these various streaming platforms. And I notice when that's a thing, there's even more of a delay to when those films come out, sometimes a year. And some films which I'm waiting to see, there isn't even there hasn't even been an announcement as to when they're actually coming out. One movie I really want to see is Barbarian, and that's been out for a long time. That came out, I think, in October of last year, I believe, and there's still no word on when that's coming out on DVD. And again, this is all by choice of on my own, in my on my own part, as far as not doing the streaming thing. And I think for me, I've talked about it a lot, but for me, there's a lot of reasons as to why I don't stream. It's mostly the around the technical aspect of how a lot of these films are streamed. The quality. I'm not a big fan of how everything seems to be really condensed for that format. So, it's a choice I've made, and this is a result of it. But again, I still eventually see these newer films. So, it is what it is. But this film, again, this came out in November, which is crazy. It came out in November 4th of 2022, and here it is, April. So many, many months. And this film is The Banshees of Inisherin. This is a really great movie. I just saw this for the first time last night, many, many months later. Really great film. The This film was directed by Martin McDonagh, who really is, I think, a pretty serious director. Somebody to really watch. I I've been really impressed with his work. There's He's done quite a few movies. Probably the best one is In Bruges, which came out in 2008. And that's almost, I almost kind of consider that uh, almost like a sequel. I almost consider this newer film almost like a sequel to that, to In Bruges in some ways. And I'll get to that in a minute. He also did the Billboards, Three Billboards, which came out in 2017, which is an okay movie. That stars Frances McDormand. That was up for a bunch of awards. Seven Psychopaths he did in 2012 is actually a really good movie. But I think the best film he's done besides The Banshees of Inisherin is In Bruges. That's a really great film. Pretty dark, pretty gritty, really funny. And The Banshees of Inisherin is no exception. I mean, it's stars Colin Farrell. I think one of the best actors around. I think he has gone in lots of his career has really gone into some very new and exciting territory. He's a very exciting director. This film also stars Barry Keoghan, who is another like up and coming star who is really great, and of course Brendan Gleeson. both Colin Farrell and Brendan Gleeson were the stars of In Bruges, which is a real dark, kind of twisted comedy. Really funny, but really dark and brooding. But it, on one part, has this really serious kind of underbelly plot line or storyline, but it's also very funny. It's a great balance. And I have to say that this film, the Banshees of Inisherin, kind of has a similarity. It's a real interesting movie because it's basically centered on these two friends that live in on this. They live in this on this isolated island in Ireland, and they're like essentially best friends. They've grown up together. They've been together their whole lives. They're drinking buddies, and it's basically just the story itself is super simple and straightforward. It's basically about these two guys and their friendship. And one of the characters played by Brendan Gleeson suddenly feels like, you know, he needs something new in his life. He needs something fresh and exciting, and that he feels like time is slipping away because they're both getting older. And they live on this beautiful island in Ireland, but essentially life is never changes. It's essentially it's very stagnant, and nothing new and exciting seems to be coming into their lives. And it's also it's an interesting setting. I mean, it's beautiful. The island, the cinematography is gorgeous and amazing, but it's an interesting juxtaposition because on one part you have this environment where it's incredibly beautiful, incredibly serene and peaceful, but there's also this kind of dark sense of isolation around it. There's there's this sense that there's almost like a degree of hopelessness. There's nothing new that's going to come your way, or that there's nothing new and exciting. There's nothing else to to strive for. And it's an interesting, and it's also kind of a dark and dreary place at the same time. So it's an interesting environment, and it's beautiful and rich, but again, it has this kind of dark underbelly to it. And the story is basically centered on these two guys, these characters, and Brendan Gleeson's character decides that he wants more out of life, and it's a real interesting narrative. It's a real great uh, melodrama. It's a real great character study because in its simplest terms, the film is, you know, to a degree, like it's so simple. But the characterizations, the different levels of the emotions that these characters feel, and the real, it has these tremendously surprising mood shifts throughout the film. At first, the film, I mean, overall too, the film is a comedy. It's incredibly funny, but especially in the beginning of the film, when you're getting to know all of the characters on this island, and especially their relationship, Colin Farrell's character and Brendan Gleeson's character, it's I don't know. At first, I got this feeling that it's really lighthearted. There's right away when I started watching it, I felt I was uh, drawn to all the characters. I thought they all had a richness to them. They all had some kind of depth, but I liked all the characters. I cared about them right away. They were all. I felt the writing is really fleshed out, and there's a lot of depth there, and you're getting little bits of information, and it's these two characters are essentially living this real kind of plain and or mundane existence, but there's enough characterization where you care about them, and I think that's really great to the writing because again, it's a fine line because the story itself is so simple, but yet it has a richness to it. And at first, the film kind of plays out like it's very funny. There's a lot of like comedic elements to it. In Bruges also had that same kind of vibe throughout it, but the film takes a lot of turns and it dives deep into kind of darker areas. It kind of starts dealing with the back. While these guys are living on this island, the backdrop is there's a war going on, and you get a sense that there's this like kind of impending dread going on. You hear bombs going off, so it goes deep into kind of mortality and also, people getting older, facing their mortality, knowing that death is imminent, and that more or less have only one chance in this life to kind of make or attempt to make something of your life. And so it has all these twists and turns, and suddenly it goes from being, like the first act, it's pretty lighthearted, it's really funny, and then it has this really serious overtone, and it gets really dark, and it gets really, I don't know, it pushes the envelope a little bit, and it really raises questions again about death and mortality and people getting older, and the concept of what is life, and it's really interesting. And the film does get darker and darker, and there's some metaphor, there's some symbolism. It's kind of a depressing movie. It's kind of a depressing movie. I was surprised, but the whole tone of the film shifts to where it gets a lot darker, and by the third act, it feels like you're enveloped in, as a viewer, you're enveloped in this real heavy existential tone, and it raises a lot of those questions, but it gets real serious, it's really dark and really somber. It's kind of a depressing movie, but I was amazed by how the tone shifted in the film, especially when you get to the second or third act. It's beautifully shot. The writing is just incredible. The and the biggest thing for me that I really loved about this film is that it went, even though the story is so simple, the tone of the whole story and the film itself went into so many different directions that where I didn't expect it. Especially when I went into pretty dark territory. But really great film. I had heard about this film for quite a while. I mean, again, this came out in November of last year, and I just saw it last night. I've always loved Colin Farrell. I've always loved Brendan Gleeson. Great actors, great track records. Lot. I've always felt they have. Both both actors can have such an ability as actors that they can kind of do anything, and they have a really good track record as far as doing many different styles of films. But this is a really great film. It's kind of a coming of age film too, to a degree. But it's essentially about relationships, and then reaching a point as you get older and facing your mortality. But pretty heavy duty film, pretty dark, kind of a depressing movie, and a real interesting juxtaposition because at first it's very funny and to a degree lighthearted, and it's got some amazingly great comedic moments like where you're outwardly laughing out loud, and then suddenly it's like really contemplative and heavy, and there's these series of events where it's kind of dark and depressing, like I've said before. But very good film. I heard about this film quite a bit over the last few months. I believe it was up for a bunch of awards, a bunch of Academy Awards. I'm not totally sure. I believe it won something, one or two awards, but really great film. I was really really impressed. The Banshees of Inisherin. Yeah, definitely check this movie out. It's it's not what you expect. Great combination of different emotions, and a really great example of a really great melodrama. I've always been a big fan of melodramas where the film is really focused. on the surface, the film can be really simple, but it's really focused on these characters, and the characterization for those characters usually are really fleshed out. So there's a tangibility. There's they're all very likable, or you have empathy towards them, and I feel like this is a prime time example of a really great melodrama, along with all of these other elements. So definitely check this out. Worth all of the hype that I had heard about. Definitely one of the better films I've seen, and a movie that on its surface is straightforward but not predictable at the same time. So definitely check this out. The Banshees of Inisherin from 2022. So this is Jason Dean, and this will conclude today's show. And if you like this channel, please like and subscribe. Keep the comments coming, and we will see you next time. Peace.